Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. Today we're going to continue going over the whole curriculum for this biology state test at the end of the year. I'm going to make sure just to hit the high points because I want to give you all a little refresher before you get in there, and that way you don't have to answer all these questions cold and not have talked about this in several months. So again, I'm just going to go through these, talk about the stuff that you really want to know about, and then that way when you get to test day, you'll know what's going on. This is the standard that we're looking at today. That might not mean anything to you, but your teacher knows what I'm talking about. And I'll just kind of give you a quick overview of what we're looking at. So looking at these are some of the standards that we'll be talking about today. Mostly these are talking about organelles and the different cellular functions. Okay, we're going to talk about these different organelles. There's a list of them here. We're going to talk about the nucleus, cytoskeleton, endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, and a couple different ones. We're going to talk about how prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells are similar and different, and we'll talk about how plant cells and animal cells are similar and different as well. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get the ball rolling on this. So I just wanted to give you a reminder of some of these organelles. If you remember back to the first video of this unit, sometimes up to 50% of the task can just be on cells. So cell biology is a huge part of the state test, and you're definitely going to get some questions on the organelles that make up cells. So what are organelles anyway? Well, you'll see that they really look like the word organ, right? In your body, you have different organs, and each organ in your body has one specific job that it does to make sure the whole body is working the way it's supposed to. That suffix ELLE just means little. So organelles are basically little organs. They each have their own specific job, and they work together to make sure the cell is functioning properly. So you need to know what some of these different organelles do. One of the most important organelles is the nucleus. The nucleus stores DNA and directs the cell. Sometimes people say it's the brain of the cell. Remember that DNA is very, very important. That's where all our genetic material is. It's basically in the instructions for what the cell should do, and so the cell kind of directs what the cell's doing by reading that DNA. Okay, another organelle you need to know about is the cytoskeleton. The cytoskeleton provides a framework for the cell. So the same way your skeleton in your body provides a framework and supports the weight of your body, that's what the cytoskeleton does. It provides a framework and supports the weight of the cell. Okay, next up we have the endoplasmic reticulum. The function of this organelle is that it transports molecules around the cell. Sometimes you'll hear people abbreviate this as just ER, so endoplasmic reticulum, ER. And I actually like that abbreviation because I tell people it's the transporter of the cell. And the word transporter has the letters ER at the end there. So just remember that. There's two types of endoplasmic reticulum. You can have the rough ER or the smooth ER. And the difference in between these is just whether or not it looks bumpy or not. I'll talk about what makes it bumpy here in just a second. So the rough ER has a bumpy appearance, and they help with protein synthesis as well as transporting things around the cell. And then the smooth ER does not have those little bumps, and it helps with lipid synthesis. So what makes the rough ER look rough? Well, it has these little dots in it that we'll see here in just a second, and those little dots are actually ribosomes. Ribosomes is another organelle you need to know about. Ribosome conducts protein synthesis. So that's just a fancy way of saying that ribosomes make proteins. Ribosomes are a very important organelle. Your body is mostly made up of proteins, and so your ribosomes have a very important job to do. They have to make those proteins that make up your cell. Okay, next up we have the Golgi apparatus. What does the Golgi apparatus do? Well, it processes and packages proteins. One hint I like to tell people, the definition that I used here has a lot of P words in it, right? Processes, packages, proteins. Look at the word Golgi apparatus. It has a couple P's in there too, right? Apparatus has two P's right next to each other. So just remember processes and packages proteins, and the Golgi apparatus, that's their job. You might remember that the proteins have to be like folded a bunch before they can work properly. That's part of what the Golgi apparatus does for us. Okay, let's talk about some other organelles as well. Okay, so at the top of the list here we have an organelle called lysosomes. Lysosomes clean out cellular waste and debris. You can kind of think of them as like the garbage men of the cell. One hint I like to tell students, lysosomes. Kind of think of the word Lysol, like a Lysol wipe. If you made a mess on a counter, you might get out a Lysol wipe to clean up that waste and debris, right? Well, a Lysol wipe and a lysosome, they kind of sound alike and they kind of have a similar job. They help to clean up the cell, right? Next up, we have the mitochondria. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Everyone knows that nickname about the mitochondria. What it really does is conduct cellular respiration. So it is making energy for us, but you need to know specifically that it does cellular respiration. That's how we can take the food that you eat and the air that you breathe, do some complicated chemical reactions and make ATP, which is the form of energy that your cells like. Next up, we have chloroplast. Chloroplasts produce glucose through the process of photosynthesis. So chloroplasts are the organelles that plant cells use to make their own food. Next up, we have centrosomes. Centrosomes help complete mitosis and meiosis by moving chromosomes. So these are barrel-shaped organelles. They make these things called spindle fibers. They kind of look like strings. The strings attach to the chromosomes and help move them around so that they're lining up properly and moving into the cells the way that they're supposed to. The next organelle is a vacuole. I just think of a vacuole like a warehouse because its job is that it stores excess water, food, and waste. So it's just a place to put stuff until we're ready to use it. And then lastly, we have the cell membrane. The cell membrane controls what enters and what leaves the cell. Okay, and we call that semi-permeable. It's made up of phospholipids, so it's a good way to define the outer boundary of the cell. It's like, hey, everything over there is outside of the cell, and everything in here is inside of the cell. Okay, what I wanted to do next, we went through the organelles and talked about what their function is. What I wanted to do now is go through, look at this picture and see if we could figure out what some of these different organelles are. You might need to be able to identify them based off of their look, and I just wanted to give you a quick reminder on what these look like. So looking at this picture, let's go ahead and get started with number 1 here. This is a small section inside of the nucleus. I'll give you a hint. Its job is that it makes ribosomes, okay? We didn't talk about it in just the past couple slides, but you have probably talked about it in your class. So number 1 is called a nucleolus. Okay, inside the nucleus is this really dark circle here. This is where we make ribosomes, okay, and that's called the nucleolus. Okay, so then the next one, what's this large circle called? Sometimes this is called the brain of the cell. What is this one called? This is the nucleus, right? The nucleus is very important. This is what makes a eukaryote a eukaryotic cell, and this is also where the DNA is kept. Okay, great. Let's go on to number 3. So 3 is pointing to these little dots outside of this organelle. Okay, its job is that it makes proteins. So what organelle makes proteins? This is the ribosome. Okay, ribosomes are very important. They make proteins. You can find them, sometimes they're attached to the organelle here. I don't want to say what it is because I don't want to give it away, but you can also find ribosomes just floating out in the cytoplasm sometimes. So you can find them in different locations. All right, let's go to the next one. So 4, there's a couple of them. You can see there's one kind of over here on the left and one kind of over here on the right. These are used to transport things around the cell, okay? These are called vesicles, okay? So you can see that this is kind of like our highway right here, but if we need to get something outside of the cell, we'll use a vesicle, which is basically just a little pouch. So inside of this pouch, it might be a hormone or a chemical that we're trying to signal. It might be some sort of debris that we're trying to get rid of. And so this would just kind of float outside of the cell, and that way we can get it out and send it where it needs to go. Okay, great. So let's go on to the next one. Where's number 5 here? Okay. All right, 5 is this whole structure right here. And I'll give you a hint that it has all these little bumps on it, and the bumps kind of make it look rough. So that organelle is called the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Sometimes you'll just hear rough ER, okay? Again, what makes it look rough here is that all these little bumps are ribosomes. And so ribosomes help to make proteins, and so the rough ER also helps conduct protein synthesis. It also is helping us get stuff around the cell. If you look at it, it almost looks like a highway or maybe like a neighborhood or something. And so you can see how it might be good for getting things around the cell there, right? Okay, so let's go to the next one. Number 6 is kind of this organelle. Okay, it kind of looks like a Wi-Fi signal. Okay, I'll give you the hint here is that this is the one that helps packages and processes proteins. Does anyone remember what that organelle is called? That's right, this is the Golgi apparatus. So this one, you can kind of think of it as like the mail system. It packages up the proteins, processes it, and then sends it where it needs to go, okay? My hint, the Golgi apparatus, it has a couple P's in it. It processes and packages proteins. Okay, great. So let's go to number 7 here. 7 is down here a little bit. It's kind of small. I'll tell you the hint for this one is that it's helping to give the cell a framework and to support it. Okay, so this is the cytoskeleton. Remember this prefix here, cyto means cell. So this is just the skeleton of the cell, right? And it's kind of helping to maintain and give it the framework of the cell there. Okay, let's go to the next one. So number 8 right here, you'll see that this looks pretty similar to 5, except for 8 doesn't have those little bumps there. So where 5 was the rough endoplasmic reticulum, 8 is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. It visually looks smoother because it does not have those little bumps there. Because it doesn't have ribosomes, it can't make proteins, but instead what it does is make lipids. And it's also helping to move stuff around the cell. Great, let's go to the next one. 9, here's 9, okay? It's kind of this kidney bean shaped, okay? You can see this one has 2 membranes. So up here on 9, you can see that there's a darker orange, but then inside there's a lighter orange as well, and that's called the cristae. And this helps with cellular respiration. So this is the powerhouse of the cell. What's the name of that organelle? That is the mitochondria. Okay, so this one, 9, is the mitochondria. Great work. Let's go to 10. So you can see there's a couple of these. The hint for this one is that in a plant cell, this would be much larger, and that this is kind of the warehouse of the cell. So what organelle kind of helps us store things until we're ready to use them? That's called a vacuole. So a vacuole is kind of like a warehouse. Okay, great. So let's go to the next one, number 11. Okay, so number 11 is just all of this white area out here. It doesn't look like it's filled with anything, but it's actually filled with a jelly-like substance, okay? So this is called the cytosol, and a lot of times people use cytosol and the word cytoplasm interchangeably. They're not exactly the same thing, but here either one would work. And so cytoplasm or cytosol is basically just what fills up the rest of the cell, okay? Okay, great, so let's go to the next one, 12. Here's 12, it's up here, okay? So any idea what that one might be? Okay, so this is the lysosome, okay? So lysosome, remember, these are like the garbage bin of the cell. They help to clean up debris. My hint for this is that lysosome and Lysol, like a Lysol wipe, kind of sound similar, and so they both help with cleaning stuff up, right? Okay, great. Let's go to 13. These are barrel-shaped organelles, okay? And they help with moving chromosomes around during mitosis and meiosis. So these are called centrioles, okay? What will happen is when we're getting ready to divide, these centrioles will actually move to opposite sides of the cell, and then they will form these spindle fibers that help move the chromosomes around. Great, okay, so I got one more here. 14 should be up here somewhere, I think, okay? The cell membrane, yeah, so I was kind of standing in front of it. 14's right here. So remember, the outer portion, kind of what this darker gray would be, is the cell membrane. It's the barrier in between the inside and the outside of the cell. Okay, and so that's the cell membrane. Great, okay, I just have a couple more slides here. What I wanted to do next is we're going to compare eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells, and then we're going to compare plant cells versus animal cells. So let's get started on that. Okay, so the first one, we're going to look at prokaryotic versus eukaryotic cells. Okay, so over here, this is a eukaryotic cell. Over here, this is a prokaryotic cell. Okay, the main difference in between these two, what these words actually mean is that eukaryotic has a nucleus, right? Eukaryotic means true nucleus, and so this has a nucleus. Prokaryotic means before nucleus. So these are more basic cells. They arrived before the nucleus was developed. So there's not a nucleus. There's no central place to hold the DNA, the DNA is just kind of floating out here in the cytoplasm, and that's called a nucleoid, okay? It's just a kind of circular DNA, but it's not being held inside of a nucleus, okay? There's a couple of differences between these cells as well that we need to know. So first of all, eukaryotic cells in general are just more advanced. They're bigger, they have more organelles, they have membrane-enclosed organelles, they have a nucleus, and they're more advanced, okay? The prokaryotic cells, like I said, these are very elementary cells. They were made before the nucleus was developed. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have membrane-enclosed organelles, okay? The DNA is just floating out here in the cytoplasm, and prokaryotic cells, the only type of prokaryotic cells are bacteria cells. So all bacteria cells are prokaryotic, and all prokaryotic cells are bacteria cells. And most prokaryotic cells have a cell wall. You can see down here, prokaryotic cells have a cell wall, okay? Mostly eukaryotic cells do not have cell walls, okay? Or they can, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Most prokaryotic cells do have a cell wall, and their cell wall is made up of something called peptidoglycan. If you ever get a question about it, that's what it's made up of, peptidoglycan, okay? So those are some differences in between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Again, prokaryotic cells are just bacteria cells, and you are a eukaryotic cell. That's what I like to tell people. You are a eukaryotic cell, or a eukaryote. Okay, great. So next up, I wanted to compare, these are both eukaryotic cells, but now we're looking at plant cells versus animal cells. Okay, on the left is an animal cell, on the right is a plant cell. And I wanted us to talk about how they are similar and how they are different. So again, this is the plant cell, this is the animal cell. What are some key differences in between these cells? Well, first of all, let's talk about how they're similar, okay? So they are both eukaryotic cells. That means they both have a nucleus. Here's the nucleus in the animal cell, here's the nucleus in the plant cell, okay? They're both eukaryotic cells, so they also both have membrane-enclosed organelles. So they both have a lot of those organelles that we've been talking about. They have the ribosomes and the Golgi and the rough and smooth ER and the nucleus and all that stuff's over here too. They've both got mitochondria, right? So they have a lot of things in common. There's a couple things that are different about them. So let's talk about how these are different from one another. Again, this is the plant cell, this is the animal cell. So one thing that plant cells have is they have a cell wall. Animal cells do not have a cell wall. Plant cells do. It's made up of cellulose, and this is what makes plants, most of the time, they're very hard to digest because you have to chew up your food a lot. Those cell walls can be very, very tough to break down. Another way to tell the difference in between animal and plant cells is that plant cells are more geometrically shaped. They'll either look like a square or a rectangle, where the animal cells are more amorphous. They don't have one particular shape. They can kind of take a lot of different shapes, okay? And even in your body, your cells can look vastly different from one another. Some of your cells are nearly a meter long. You have some nervous cells that run down your spinal cord. A single cell can be really, really long. But all of these cells can look different from each other. Because they don't have a cell wall, they can take those different forms. Okay, so cell wall, no cell wall, geometric, non-geometric. What are some other ways that they're different? Well, in plant cells have a large vacuole. If you see right here, the vast majority of this interior of the cell here is this big blue blob. That's a vacuole. Plant cells need a lot of water, and they need somewhere to put all of that water. And so this vacuole will often be filled with water. The plant cells have a large central vacuole. Animal cells will have vacuoles, but they're not as big, and they're not central like the plant cell is. Another difference in between these two is that the plant cell will have chloroplast. Remember, chloroplast is how they do photosynthesis. Animal cells do not have chloroplast. Another difference in between them is that animal cells have an organelle called centrioles. Remember, centrioles are what helps us move the chromosomes around during mitosis and meiosis. Plant cells don't have that, okay? So those are a couple of ways that these plant and animal cells are different from one another. If you want a little bit more practice, go to our Canvas page and find the Venn diagram that compares the plant and the animal cell and the one that compares the prokaryotic and the eukaryotic cell, and that would be a great review for this as well. So thank y'all so much for following along. Your teacher has some other work for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.